Hi, if we've had the opportunity to meet in person, you know that I love conversations about real estate. As for many of us, I've been missing those conversations over the last 8 months, just the human interaction and sharing of our experiences in life. So this video is an attempt to share some of those conversations that I would otherwise be having with you in person about what's happening in our real estate market here on the Monterey Peninsula, but via video. I hope it's helpful. I hope it sparks some conversations, and I look forward to being in person again sometime soon. My name is Malone Hodges, and I'm a real estate broker here on the Monterey Peninsula. My primary markets are Carmel, Pebble Beach, Carmel Valley, Pacific Grove, and Monterey, as well as the Big Sur coast. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to give you some high-level observations of what I see happening in the market here, talk a little bit about some of the data that supports those observations, and then I'll run through a quick state of the market report for each of those markets. And then in the end, I want to share some of the experiences my clients have had in making offers and buying properties in the last 6 months. So I suspect you've probably been reading in the national and regional press about the changes in the real estate market here in the United States and to some degree across the world. We're seeing an increase in demand along with a reduction in supply. So at the state level, we're seeing an increase in the number of properties that are receiving multiple counteroffers and actually percentage of properties that are selling for over asking price as well. And that's certainly been the case here. If you look at Monterey County as a whole, the average sales price has gone up substantially since the beginning of 2020, and as has the number of properties that go into escrow within their first 2 weeks of being on the market. That's an indicator of energy in the market, buyers that are set up and ready to go and just waiting for the right house to come along. About 5 days ago, I put a property in escrow that had been on the MLS for about 6 hours before we wrote our offer, and we were able to put it in escrow by the end of the next day. So these are buyers that are ready to act if the right property comes along. So a question to ask is, what's happening in our local market? Where is that energy coming from, in addition to sort of the global changes that we're seeing with people wanting to be out of large urban areas? Well, a big part of it is the tech industry's decision to let people spend a greater percentage of their time working from home. A lot of our clients, including clients of mine in this area, are tech related or in industries related to tech in Silicon Valley. Whereas in the past, they would come to Carmel, Pebble Beach, Carmel Valley, Pacific Grove, looking for a second home. Now they're coming to town looking for a home that I like to call a second primary residence. Whereas in the past, they could see themselves coming to town for a weekend every few weeks, or maybe they take a Friday and a Monday off and come down for a 4-day weekend. The frame of reference has now flipped for a lot of these buyers. We're getting a lot more requests for homes that have offices. I have a great client who wants a home office at the other end of the house from his young children, for example. In addition to the increase in demand from buyers coming to the area, we've also seen a drop-off in available properties for sale. Inventory has fallen off dramatically in each of our markets. This is driven by a number of factors. One, of course, is that selling your house during the time of COVID carries with it greater risk than it did ever in the past. We are highly sensitive to our sellers' sense of safety. We all wear gloves, we wear masks, we limit the number of people that come into a property at a time. We pre-qualify the buyers to make sure they're actually qualified buyers. Nevertheless, we still have people coming into your home. And a lot of sellers are quite reasonably concerned about that and don't want people coming into their homes, and therefore have opted not to sell a property they might have otherwise put on the market sometimes in 2020. A second important factor in our limited inventory is the decision by sellers not to sell because they've discovered they're actually using their Monterey Peninsula home far more than they have in the past. Every year, a percentage of properties that come on the market are put there by sellers who have decided they're just not using the home as frequently as they thought they would. A fair percentage of our more expensive homes are typically vacant a big percentage of the year. That has not been the case in 2020. If you are in town, I invite you to walk down a street in the Golden Rectangle, Casanova, Camino Real, and remember what it was like walking down that same street in 2019. If it was a Wednesday in 2019 or 2018, you would need a flashlight because so few houses would be occupied because they're second homes and the people just weren't in town. If you go do that now, you'll discover that almost every single home is occupied. And that's because folks who had the opportunity to relocate to a second home here on the peninsula did so. When their employer, wherever their main residence is, gave them the opportunity to work from home, rather than work from their primary residence, they relocated and decided to work from here. So a lot of those people who would have otherwise sold in 2020, maybe to capture some of the gain that they've accrued in their home since they purchased it, say, 8 or 10 years ago, have opted not to do so. They're continuing to use the homes. So we've seen a reduction in inventory and an increase in demand. And that's really what's come together to drive prices up and make it a challenge to buy a home at the moment on the Monterey Peninsula. So now what I'd like to do is look at each of our specific markets and really touch quickly on what's happening in them. There is a weekly report I produce that includes the statistics that I'm about to share with you. So if you'd like to have me email that to you, feel free to drop me an email at malone@malonehodges.com, or you can also find information on the website. So first, if we look at Carmel and look at the real-time market profile, you'll see some of the key statistics that we use as we track properties here on the Monterey Peninsula. In terms of average price per square foot, which is at the moment is about $1,100 per square foot, list price, median price, and the market action index. The market action index is a score that just gives you an instantaneous insight about whether a market is primarily a buyer's advantage or a seller's advantage. And you'll see here in Carmel, the score is 41.4, which puts it firmly in a seller's advantage, with a balanced market number being 30. So the algorithm is set to where 30 is a balanced market. Now, if you look at the market action index in Carmel as a graph, it's even more dramatic to see the change in the last, say, 18 months in that number. So clearly we are in a seller's market here in Carmel, and I don't think there's anybody who would debate that fact. In addition to the market action index, it's interesting to look at inventory as a graph as well. If you look at inventory as a graph in Carmel, you can see that the number of properties for sale has fallen off dramatically since the beginning of COVID. So if we turn to Pebble Beach and look at the statistics in Pebble Beach, they're a little bit different than Carmel, which is often the case. Pebble Beach tends to move a little bit slower than Carmel. Still an incredible amount of demand for properties in Pebble Beach. One important thing when looking at statistics in Pebble Beach is you have to keep in mind it's a very small market, especially at the higher price points. So you have to be cautious because a significant swing, one sale of an $8 million property can make any given quarter, week, month, or year look quite different than the corresponding week, month, or quarter of the previous year. So it's a very small data set in Pebble Beach, which is something to be cautious of. Nevertheless, you can see that as with Carmel, Pebble Beach is also a seller's advantage with a market action index score of 35.6. Again, 30 is the set point for a balanced market. As is true of all of these markets, if you look at median price in Pebble Beach, you can see the curve moving up as we progress through 2020. Turning to Carmel Valley, we also see, as is true of all of our markets, an increase in median price, a reduction in inventory, and a situation where the sellers are really driving the market. Not to the same degree as in Carmel. While it's still a seller's market in Carmel Valley, it's clear that a lot of the demand to live on the Monterey Peninsula, primarily from those buyers that are looking for a second primary residence, is focused on Carmel, Pebble Beach, and to a lesser extent, Carmel Valley. So if you look at the market action index for Carmel Valley, you see it's at 31.5. You see it is a seller's advantage, but not as dramatic as Carmel's. As with other markets, we've seen a reduction in inventory in Carmel Valley, but it's not the same curve as you see in the other markets. There was a bit of a upswing, and then we've seen another sort of secondary upswing as we've closed out 2020. Again, it's still a seller's market, but it's a market in which buyers have a little bit more control than they do in Carmel. Of all of our markets, both Pacific Grove and Monterey have seen the most dramatic move into a seller's market in terms of the market action index. Remember, the market action index is that metric by which you measure whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market, with 30 being a balanced market. In the case of Pacific Grove, the market action index is 53.4. It's come off that a bit in the last week or two, but that is a dramatic market action index number that clearly shows that the sellers in Pacific Grove are making a lot of the decisions in these transactions. With only 29 properties on the market in Pacific Grove at the moment, that really isn't much of a surprise. As with the other markets, you can see the increase in median price from the relatively flat median price that we saw through 2019 as it has climbed up as we've come out of the COVID lockdown in terms of being able to show real estate. As with Pacific Grove, in the city of Monterey, there are a finite number of homes, with about 26 homes listed for sale as I record this. So there are far more potential buyers in Monterey at the moment than there are sellers. And that, of course, has driven the market action index, which again is the tool by which we measure the relative buyer versus seller markets, well into the seller's advantage category. If you look at price per square foot of homes in Monterey, you can see the impact that this reduction in inventory and increase in buyers has had on Monterey properties, with a substantial increase in price per square foot after a relatively flat second half of 2019. So what kind of experiences are clients having at the moment trying to make a purchase on the Monterey Peninsula? My advice is, if you're looking for a property here, is to have your ducks in a row, know what you're going to spend, and set a cap, and then really work to identify if the property meets all of the criteria. In this market at the moment, I like to say you're basically paying retail. There are very few wholesale discounted deals in a market like this. Now, paying retail for the right house, with interest rates where they are, the pressures on all of us given COVID and the desire to have a second primary residence, can make a lot of sense. But you also have to set some limits. And I have clients that have done a very good job of that. I have some great clients. I'm happy to say we're in escrow. It was our 5th shot at a home. They absolutely had the ability to win in the previous 4 attempts to purchase a home, but they set a limit. We worked on what we thought the market value was. We identified what criteria the houses did and did not meet, and we didn't go beyond that. The 5th home is the perfect match for them. It's a wonderful home. And I think all of us are happy that we didn't buy one of the other 4 to be available to buy the one that's the perfect match. So you have to be in this kind of market willing to let a property go and not think it's the only one that will ever meet your criteria. I have another client that we successfully purchased a home. We were able to do so by making an all-cash offer and non-contingent. But in the time frame where the property was listed, we dug in deep and really got smart about what the property had to offer. And in his case, he was doing a remodel, so he was comfortable taking that property on. In another case, we made what I thought was a solid offer, as did the buyers, and there were 12 offers on that house, and we were not invited into the best and final round. We were not one of the 3 offers they countered. But we were able to re-engage in the negotiation by bringing in a fresh offer in that round, and were able to prevail given the terms that we offered. Again, a perfect match for those clients. On the seller side, I think it's important that you price the home appropriately so you don't end up in a situation where you're the outlier property that sits on the market. You also have to recognize that you're going to get inundated with people coming to look at your home if you've priced it correctly. So it's important to have the right mindset as a seller as to how you're going to deal with that inundation of interest. I also think it's incredibly important to do reports preemptively. And I'll talk about that in another video about why it's important in a non-contingent market. But you want to have your home inspection done and your roof inspection done and have those reports done so you can present them to a potential buyer when they first come and present themselves, ideally before they present an offer, so the buyer is fully informed. I hope this has been helpful. I look forward to when we can actually have a conversation in person, but in the meantime, I'd love your feedback on what I've said here. Please send me any questions. I'm happy to answer them by phone or email. Thank you very much.